What I want to do in my paper is to tell you about some general findings about the meaning of the trials for us as historians. Here I'm using my research on several hundreds of these trials, which I studied at the Holocaust Memorial Museum several years ago, and of my study of archives in the Kiev and Party archive. I will also try to focus on several trials against Babi-Yar perpetrators, but I have to say that while these were very few, which I saw, and that my study of this aspect is rather incomplete, because it's a very small sample which I saw. Nevertheless, I will try. Post-war Ukraine experienced a huge number of trials against so-called homeland traitors and accomplices, изменники Родины и пособники, meaning Soviet citizens who collaborated with the Germans under occupation. But you still have very little information about the post-war prosecution of these collaborators, which until now has rarely been the topic of historical research. We thus lack a systematic analysis of the trials with regard to the differences in methods of proceeding, public involvement, treatment of the defendants and witnesses, the length of sentences, and its political and social functions for the post-war society in general. This is partially due to the fact that until now historians are often denied access to the trial materials, which are deposited at the former regional KGB archives, currently SBU archives in Ukraine. The actual number of defendants who were convicted as collaborators remains as well unknown. The research of the Ukrainian historian Nikolsky, who relies on materials from the Kiev SBU archive, provides the following figures. Between 1943 and 1953, the NKVD arrested more than 93,000 potential collaborators in the Ukraine, which constituted nearly half of all arrests of the Ukrainian NKVD. Some 80,000 individuals were accused of having been traitors and accomplices of the German occupation authorities, another 13,000 of spying for foreign countries. The majority of the arrests took place, nearly 60%, took place during and immediately after the war. However, as Nikolsky also admits, these numbers may be incomplete. According to a publication of the Russian Federal Security Service, between 1943 and 1953, over 320,000 Soviet citizens had been arrested for collaboration with the Germans. This constituted 1/3 of all arrests by the NKVD in these years. If we compare these numbers with the roughly 100,000 Germans and Austrians who had been convicted as war and NS criminals since 1944 all over Europe, including about 21,000 Germans, mostly POWs, who were convicted in the Soviet Union, it becomes obvious that far more Soviet citizens had been convicted for war crimes under German occupation than Germans. This is nothing specific of the Soviet Union. In other European countries as well, the post-war settlement with collaborators was much more intense and bloody than the prosecution of German war criminals. And similar as in other European countries in the Soviet Union during wartime and immediate post-war years, the conviction of collaborators did not only proceed on a legal basis. Not uncommonly, collaborators were shot by NKVD special units without any trial. For example, reported German Einsatzkommandos from several places in the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine that Red Army units, after the liberation of these occupied territories, executed numerous Soviet citizens who had cooperated with the Germans. In some villages, even the whole population was murdered because of their positive attitude towards the Germans. Whereas in Western research a growing interest in questions of transitional justice, memory policies, and the transformation of the societies after World War II is recognizable during the last years, this topic is hardly studied post-former Soviet Union. Within the broader context of Soviet justice in Ukraine, from the late 1920s through the 1960s, the post-war trials of collaborators played a rather insignificant role. More than 3/4 of the nearly 1 million arrests which took place in Ukraine during the years 1927 to 1961 happened before the war. This indicates that the cleansing of potential enemies of the Soviet government was much more extensive during the 1930s than during the post-war period. Nevertheless, the collaboration of Soviet citizens in the police, local administration, and the economy of occupied Ukraine had been decisive for the successful implementation of German occupation, including the Holocaust. The extent to which local policemen were involved in crimes committed by the Germans in the occupied Soviet territories has only recently become a topic of research in Ukraine and in the West. The main research focus so far concentrated on military and police collaboration, whereas we hardly know anything about administrative or economic collaboration. In Soviet historiography, the fact that some of the Soviet population had collaborated with the Germans was taboo. There is hardly any reference to this in the extensive Soviet literature about revolution. Where collaboration was dealt with, it often fulfilled propaganda purposes and referred only to non-Russians who were stigmatized as bourgeois nationalists. As I mentioned in relation to the documents from the former Central Party in Kiev, my paper makes use of the collection of the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington of Soviet war crimes records related to the Holocaust in Ukraine. This valuable collection, which encompasses over 800 trials, mainly of former policemen, was assembled from the records deposited in 21 former KGB archives in Ukraine. In Ukraine itself, Ukrainian and foreign researchers alike are still having often difficulties accessing these trial records, and I would really like to express my hope that this situation will change soon, and that the Ukrainian SBU archive open their unique trial materials for historians. It seems reasonable that post-war trials in Ukraine, in many respects, can be exemplary for the inner logic of the trials in the whole Soviet Union at that time. Ukraine accounted for at least 1/3 of the arrested collaborators in the Soviet Union. But at the same time, we also have to be aware of the fact that there existed certain particularities in Ukraine which probably influenced both the way collaboration functioned and the way it was dealt with by military tribunals and post-years. The most important of these particularities is the existence of a strong Ukrainian nationalism in the western parts of Ukraine. trial records may be quite tendentious, and therefore should be approached especially critically. The interrogations of the defendants and witnesses were often carried out by just one Soviet official, and the close examination of the interrogation protocols reveals the officers did not always accurately record the statements, but rather interpreted them. This warrants a close look at the semantics of the trial records, and for better results, these records should be used along with other documents from Nazi occupation. In quite a few cases, the defendants protested during the trial against the NKVD methods of forced confession. At the same time, trial records are an invaluable source for the study of both German occupation of Ukraine and post-occupation. They often contain a detailed description of mass executions of the Jews in different localities, as well as witness accounts on ghettos and camps. Some of the trial records contain primary documents, including reports from local administrations. Particularly in the later trials, marked by more thorough pre-trial investigation, the records contain sometimes drawings and photos of ghettos, camps, and mass graves. In some cases, the trial records are the only available source documenting the existence of ghettos, camps, and sites of mass executions. For example, in the case of Donetsk, the trial of the head of the local administration is the only known source aside from survivor testimonies pointing to the existence of a ghetto in the city. Particularly shocking are the detailed accounts of mass killings of witnesses, survivors, and defendants. Until very recently, scholars have been using mainly German records to study the Holocaust in the occupied Pacific territories. This partially happened because the Soviet archives have been insecure foreign researchers were but the trial records enable us now to study the Holocaust from below. They offer a regional and local perspective, demonstrating the extent to which conditions on the ground affected the dynamics of the German occupation in Ukraine. We can also learn from trial records about the personal profile of the local collaborators and about their motives. The testimonies of defendants and witnesses tend to be a more reliable source when it comes to local collaborators. As far as German perpetrators are concerned, witnesses often perceive all German policemen as part of the Gestapo. Finally, the trial records present the problem of collaboration as seen by the Soviet authorities, showing how the latter had been handling convictions of collaborators in rare cases of embassy. To show, to some extent, the records reflect on the relationship between regional tribunals and state agencies, that is, between the center and the periphery. Few public trials reflect also on Soviet memory policies regarding Holocaust, collaboration, and war generally. But by using trial records alone, naturally we cannot draw any definite conclusion regarding the scope of the collaboration, as they fail to mention the individuals executed without trial, the wrongfully accused, or those who, for one reason or another, had not been tried. As it seems, convictions of collaborators were part of a larger negotiation process about the new post soziального диалога, Let me now finally summarize some first observations about the meaning of post-war trials against collaborators for our understanding of Bavia. First, it can be noted that the trials against German war criminals and Soviet collaborators present an important resource for the history of Bavia. A systematic analysis of trials against Bavia perpetrators from the 1940s until the 1980s is still a research desiderata. All the focus on Karl Berghoff and his forthcoming work, which will include these aspects as well. Such a study would have to look at the changing judicial practices and memory policies of the Soviet state with regard to collaboration in the Holocaust, as well as at the changing narratives in the witness accounts. So my own analysis is based on very few trials from the 1940s and beginning of the 1950s against Soviet citizens, members of the Ukrainian police units. Most of these trials were not public, they were influenced by the general character of the late Stalinist justice system. In post-war years, Soviet legal agencies underwent a certain bureaucratization and also professionalization, which continued after Stalin's death. Moreover, the regime recognized the immense symbolic meaning of trials. Therefore, a demonstrated lawfulness was maintained not only in the few public show trials, but in the numerous non-public trials as well. This appearance of Rechtsförmlichkeit in post-war trials stood in a certain contradistinction to the practice of the 1930s, when hundreds of thousands of people were convicted without seeing any judge or prosecutor. So can we argue that post-war trials served the Stalinist regime for its own legitimation inside Soviet society and abroad? However, unlike the trials of the Stalinist 1930s, in which mostly innocent people were sentenced for pure political reasons, post-war trials often concluded with the conviction of real war criminals. This brought about a convalescent situation in which the Stalinist regime successfully legitimized its post-war purchase by the fact that now at least partly real criminals were convicted. Looking at the trials of Bavia perpetrators, we see that the Stalinist regime had a very broad understanding of collaboration and war crimes. Besides few public trials against Germans and Soviet citizens who participated in mass murder actions, there seems to be a large number of trials against ordinary policemen. These men often did not participate directly in the murder of Jews, Soviet POWs and civilians, but nevertheless were sentenced to death or 25 years of forced labor. For example, one former member of the 23rd Battalion of the Schutzpolizei SD here joined the police only in April 1943, was sentenced in 1951 by the military tribunal in Kiev to 25 years of forced labor. He had 2 times guarded Soviet civilians, most probably Jews, to Bavia. Even the fact that later on he used his position to free several other Soviet prisoners was not considered by the tribunal to his benefit. Most severely, defendants were sentenced belonged to Ukrainian nationalist organizations. The Stalinist regime used the trials, especially in western Ukraine, as instrument to suppress the Ukrainian nationalist underground. The biographies of the policemen revised certain elder stereotypes. Among them were not only Ukrainian nationalists, people who suffered repressions from the Stalinist regime in the 1930s, as the Soviet propaganda suggested. There were Russians, ethnic Germans, and other ethnic minorities as well, especially in the ethnically mixed regions like the Donbass. And even several former members of the Communist Party, as for example the former Russian worker and communist Arechov, who became one of the perpetrators of Maria by denouncing Jewish families and keeping them in an enclosed apartment until they were deported to Maria with the Germans. In fact, collaboration as well as anti-Semitism were much broader phenomena in the occupied territories, not limited to ethnic Ukrainians and nationalists. And let me end now with a final observation. The public perception of Maria still seems to be dominated by the mass murder action of more than 33,000 Jews in September 1941, the largest single Nazi shooting of Jews in the Soviet Union, as speak by and we tend to forget the 10,000s of Jewish and also non-Jewish victims which followed during the whole period of German occupation. The trials show us the daily practice of the Holocaust from below, which implies the daily denunciations, the separation of Jewish families, their deportations to Babia, the theft of Jewish property, and the roles local collaborators played in this. Many accounts of witnesses and defendants in the trials clearly address Jewish victims, whereas, as we heard today by Seltzer, official Soviet post-war propaganda spoke of the victims only as peaceful